My younger brother has a way of saying things that sound almost like compliments until you realize about 3 seconds later that they aren't. He's always been that way. Even when we were kids, he knew how to slip a knife in sideways and smile while he did it. I used to think I was imagining it. Took me about 40 years to stop second-guessing myself. The night I'm talking about was Thanksgiving. My sister-in-law does Thanksgiving every year at her place in Scottsdale. Big spread, nice house, the kind of neighborhood where the driveways are sealed and the Christmas lights go up the week before Halloween. Everyone shows up. My brother's kids, my cousin Loretta and her husband, my aunt on my mother's side who is 81 years old and still drives herself everywhere, which terrifies all of us. I drove in from Tucson, about an hour and 40 minutes, give or take. I'd been making that drive for years. My brother, I'll call him my brother, that's all you need to know, he met me at the door. Big hug, slap on the back, the whole production. He's 6 years younger than me and looks it. Always has. He keeps himself up, hits the gym, got the kind of jaw that photographs well. I know because he posts about it constantly. Big brother, he said, stepping back to look at me. You look tired. That was the first thing he said to me. Not hello. Not good to see you. You look tired. I told him the drive was fine and walked past him into the house. Dinner was the way it always is. Too much food, not enough chairs, my aunt telling a story about her neighbor's dog that she'd already told at Easter. My brother held court at one end of the table, the way he always does. He works in real estate development, has a good head for numbers and an even better head for making sure everyone in the room knows it. That night he was talking about a deal he had in the works in North Phoenix, some mixed-use thing, investors lined up, big numbers. I listened, ate my sweet potato, passed the rolls when asked. At some point he looked down the table at me. So what are you up to these days, he said. Still doing the consulting thing? I said yes, still doing the consulting thing. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone tells you they've decided to stay in a town you've already written off. How long's that been now, since the company? About 11 years, I said. 11 years. He repeated it like he was doing math. Huh, that was all. Just huh. My cousin Loretta changed the subject to her son's soccer league, and I was grateful to her for it. But my brother circled back. He always circles back. It was after dessert, when people were standing around with coffee, and the kids had disappeared to some back room with their devices. My aunt was on the couch. My brother found me by the kitchen doorway and lowered his voice like he was doing me a favor. I worry about you, he said. You know that, right? You're 63 years old, you're out there in Tucson doing, I don't even know what you're doing, honestly, and you've got no real structure, no. He paused, seemed to search for the word no foundation. At this point in life, that's what matters. I looked at him. I have a house, I said. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. The kind that's designed to sound like warmth but functions like a door closing. I know you have a house, brother. That's not what I mean, and you know it. I just think about where you're going to be in 10 years, and I don't know. I hope you have a plan. I didn't say anything. I just care, he said. That's all this is. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, then went back to find his wife. I stood there with my coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the dark backyard. The string lights were on over the patio. My sister-in-law has good taste. I thought about saying something. I thought about it for probably 30 seconds. Then I decided not to, put my cup in the sink and went to sit with my aunt on the couch. She asked me how the drive was. I told her fine. She told me her neighbor's dog had gotten into the compost again. I listened like it was the first time. I drove back to Tucson that night, instead of staying over the way I usually did. Told everyone I had an early call. Which was true, actually. The thing about my brother is that he's not entirely wrong about the story he's built in his head. He just doesn't have the facts, what he knows. I spent 22 years at an engineering firm in Denver. I was a senior partner. The firm dissolved. Not dramatically, not a crash, just the slow unwinding of a thing that had run its course, and I took my share and stepped back. I was 52. I moved to Tucson because I'd always wanted to live somewhere warm, and I was done doing things because they made sense on paper instead of in my chest. What he doesn't know, most of it. He doesn't know about my wife, Cecilia. He doesn't know about our daughter, June. He doesn't know about the property outside Tubac, the 16 acres with the workshop and the greenhouse and the 2 horses that are technically Cecilia's, but that I've grown embarrassingly attached to. He doesn't know about the consulting work, which is real and which is not nothing. I contract with 3 civil engineering firms across the Southwest on infrastructure projects. I work maybe 20 hours a week. I charge accordingly. He doesn't know any of it because I never told him. And I want to be clear about why, because I've had people ask me this, and I've had to think about it honestly. It's not that I was ashamed. It's not that I was hiding anything dark. It's that my brother has spent our entire adult lives deciding what my life means. When I was at the firm, I wasn't doing it right because I wasn't in ownership fast enough. When I bought my place in Denver, I bought in the wrong neighborhood. When I took time to deal with my mother's estate, which took 2 years and was genuinely complicated, he made a comment at Christmas about how some people have the luxury of not having a real job. That last one I didn't forget. I married Cecilia 9 years ago, privately, on a Tuesday morning at the Pima County Courthouse with 2 friends as witnesses. We had dinner at a restaurant in downtown Tucson that we both loved. She wore a blue dress. I wore the good blazer I bought for my firm's 20th anniversary. We didn't tell anyone for a while. Not because we were embarrassed, but because we weren't ready for anyone else's opinions about it. And then a while became a long while. Cecilia understood. She's a private person, same as me. She came out of a large Mexican-American family in Nogales. 4 siblings, everyone always in each other's business, and she'd spent her adult life building something quieter. She wasn't interested in announcing herself to people who hadn't earned the information. She's also the one who eventually said we should probably tell people. She was right, we did. We told her family and her friends. We told my aunt, who cried and made us promise to come to Nogales for dinner, which we did. We didn't tell my brother. That sounds worse than it is. Or maybe it's exactly as bad as it is and I've just made my peace with it. June is 26 now. She grew up partly in Denver with her mother, my first wife, Diane, who I was with for 12 years, who is a good person and a good mother, and who I think about with nothing but warmth. And partly with me. She graduated from the University of Arizona 4 years ago, civil engineering, which I can't pretend I wasn't pleased about. She works for a firm in Phoenix now. My brother has never met her. I've told myself stories about why. That the moment never came. That June was a teenager and busy and I didn't want to make her part of a complicated family dynamic. That once you've waited this long, telling someone becomes its own kind of confrontation. All of that is true. But honestly, if I'm being straight with you, I didn't want him to have it. I didn't want him to meet my daughter and make her feel like I had. I didn't want Cecilia sitting across a table from him and watching him decide whether she was worth knowing. I didn't want to give him a single more thing to form an opinion about. So I didn't. The call came in February, about 3 months after Thanksgiving. My brother called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the workshop. I had the radio on and my hands were in the middle of something, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. He sounded different right away. Not the usual easy confidence. Something tighter in his voice. "Hey," he said, "you got a few minutes?" I said yes. He started talking. The Phoenix deal had fallen through. Not just that deal. The whole structure he'd built around it, the investors, the bridge financing, a project he'd been developing for almost 2 years. A key partner had pulled out 6 weeks before closing, which triggered a clause, which cascaded, which he was telling me all of it very fast. The way you talk when you've been holding something in, and now you're letting it go all at once. He'd lost a significant amount of money. His firm was in trouble. He was behind on 2 commercial mortgages. He needed to restructure, and he didn't have the liquidity to do it alone, and he didn't want to go to a bank because of how it would look. He wanted to know if I could help. I sat down on the stool in my workshop and looked at the piece I'd been working on. I do woodworking, nothing fancy, furniture mostly, and I was quiet for a moment. "How much are we talking?" I asked. He told me. It was not a small number. I said I'd need a few days to think about it and look at some things. He said he'd appreciate that. Then, and I don't know what made him do it, maybe the vulnerability of the moment opened something up in him, he said, "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving." What I said okay. "I don't actually think you don't have a plan," he said. I don't know what you do out there and it makes me uncomfortable." "I know," I said. "I'm not always," he started and then stopped. "I know I'm not always easy." I said I'd call him back by Wednesday. I talked to Cecilia that night after dinner. We were on the back porch. The air in February in Tubac is cool and clean, and there's usually a coyote somewhere if you listen. She had her feet up on the railing, the way she does. I told her everything. She'd heard the Thanksgiving part. She'd heard a version of my brother over the years. But I told her all of it, including the number. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. She was right, the way she usually is. I already knew I was going to help him. I didn't know how yet, or on what terms, but I knew I wasn't going to let him lose what he'd built, because I was holding a grudge about things said at a dinner table. My father, who died when my brother and I were in our 30s, too young, heart. My father used to say that being the bigger person was mostly just a willingness to let things cost you something. He didn't mean it as a compliment, exactly. He meant it as a description. I called an old friend from my firm days, a financial guy named Ted who I trust completely, and I asked him to look at my brother's numbers. He did. He called me back 2 days later with his assessment, it was manageable, but barely, and only with real capital and real discipline. I called my brother on Wednesday. I told him I would lend him enough to stabilize the 2 mortgages and buy him time to restructure. Not a gift, a loan, with terms on paper, with a payment schedule. I told him I was doing it because he was my brother and because I believed he could get the firm back to solid ground, not because I wanted to be owed something. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you had that kind of," he started. "I know you didn't," I said. "Where does that?" "I've been saving for a long time," I said. "I live modestly. I work. I don't need a lot." That wasn't the whole picture, and we both knew it. But it was enough for that conversation. I told him I wanted to come up to Phoenix. Talk in person. He said, "Of course, come whenever." I drove up on a Thursday morning. Cecilia came with me. June was at work, but we'd made plans to have dinner with her that evening. My brother met me at his office in North Scottsdale. Nice space, glass and clean lines, a view of the mountains. His assistant brought us coffee. He looked tired and grateful in equal measure. We sat across from each other at the table in his conference room, and I slid the folder across to him. Ted had helped me put together the loan terms, straightforward, fair, nothing punitive. He read through it, nodded, said it was more than fair. Then I said, "There are some things I want to tell you." He looked up. "Not conditions," I said. "Just things I should have told you a long time ago." I told him about Cecilia first. I told him we'd been married 9 years, that she was a remarkable woman, that I was sorry he hadn't met her sooner, that I hoped we could change that. He put the folder down. "You're married?" 9 years, I said. He looked at the table for a moment. Then, "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't." I told him about June, that she was 26, that she was an engineer, that she lived in Phoenix, that I was very proud of her, and that she would be joining us for dinner if he and his wife wanted to come. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller somehow. Not weak, just human. "Why?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I thought about giving him the diplomatic answer. I'd had versions of it prepared. Instead, I said, "Because every time I've had something good in my life, you've found a way to make it feel like it wasn't enough. And I didn't want to hand you those things. I wanted to keep them." He didn't argue. He didn't have a rebuttal ready. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked at his coffee. He said, "That's fair." Just that. That's fair. Dinner was at a place in central Phoenix that June had picked. She has good taste, my daughter. She gets it from her mother, honestly, though I'd never say that out loud. She was already there when we arrived. She was wearing a dark green jacket, and she had her hair up. And she stood when she saw me and hugged me the way she always does, with her whole self. I introduced her to my brother and his wife. He shook her hand, and then unexpectedly he said, "You look like your grandmother, your father's mother." June looked at me. I looked at him. He meant our mother, who we lost in 2014. "I've heard that before," June said. "I never got to meet her, but I've heard that." "She was a good woman," my brother said, and his voice had that quality again, the smaller one. "She would have loved to know you." June said, "I think I would have loved to know her too." We all sat down. We ordered. The conversation found its footing the way conversations do when everyone is trying carefully to be their best self. His wife is warm. I didn't know that about her. I knew of her, had met her briefly at 2 family events over the years, but I didn't know her. She's from Georgia, laughs easily, asked June smart questions about her work. By the time the food came, it felt almost normal. Not entirely. There's years and years of absence in the room when you're having a dinner like that, and you feel it, but almost. At the end of the night, in the parking lot, my brother and I stood by our cars for a moment while the women were finishing their conversation by the entrance. He said, "I want to do better. With you." I said, "So do I." He said, I know I can be. I know how I come across sometimes. I've known for a long time. I said, I believe you. We didn't hug. That was right for us. That was honest. It's been 8 months since that dinner. My brother's firm is still standing. He's made 3 of the scheduled payments on time, which I'll be honest, I wasn't certain he would. But he has. Ted keeps an eye on the numbers for me, which is worth what I pay him. He came down to Tucson in the spring with his wife, spent a weekend. I showed him the property, the workshop, the greenhouse. Cecilia made a meal that silenced him in a way very few things ever have. He met the horses. He fed them carrots from his palm. Awkward at first the way city people are, then easier. He's not a sentimental man. But I caught him standing at the fence by himself that evening, just watching them move in the last of the light, and he had a look on his face I hadn't seen since we were boys. Something open about it. He said, at dinner that night, you built something real out here. I said, I know. He laughed. First real laugh I'd heard from him in years. Not the performance laugh, not the social laugh, an actual one. We've talked on the phone a few times since. Not every week, not even every month. But more than we did. The conversations are different. He asks questions. He listens to the answers. I don't know how much credit to give the money. Some, probably. A person who might have lost everything tends to reevaluate. I know that. I'm not naive enough to think the humility he showed that day in the conference room would have appeared without the crisis behind it. That's okay. Humility that comes from hardship is still humility. June had lunch with him and his wife last month. She texted me after and said it was fine. Good, even. She said his wife is someone she could actually see spending time with. That's enough. For now, that's plenty. I want to say something about the privacy part, because I know some people hear this kind of story and think, that's strange. Why would you hide a wife and a daughter for almost a decade? What kind of person does that? I understand the question. I've asked it of myself. What I've landed on is this. There are people in your life who help you know yourself better, and there are people who obscure it. My brother, for a long time, was the second kind. When I was around him, I started to see myself through his eyes, and through his eyes I was always a little less than. A little behind. A little not quite. Cecilia is not that. June is not that. I needed to protect the feeling I had when I was with them from the feeling I had when I was around him. That's the truth, as clearly as I can say it. I'm not saying it was the right thing. I'm saying it was the thing I did, and I understand why I did it, and I've made peace with that. What I didn't expect was that telling him would feel, eventually, like putting something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. I'm 63 years old. I'm in good health. I have 16 acres outside Tucson, a woman I love, a daughter I'm proud of, work that means something to me, and 2 horses I am not willing to admit how much I love. My younger brother thinks I look tired sometimes. He's not entirely wrong. But it's a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from building things that matter. From days that have real content to them. From a life that is, and I mean this, not as a boast but as a fact, exactly what I wanted it to be. I set down the loan paperwork that day in his conference room and I thought, the only thing that was ever missing from this life was saying it out loud. So I said it out loud. That was enough.